Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Catherine Schkupp, and I'm the Partnerships and Diplomatic Relations Manager for the Combat Antisemitism Movement, a global coalition engaging more than 770 organizations and millions of people of all faiths, races, and nationalities in the collective effort against the world's oldest hatred. As Holocaust educators and others seek to ensure the horrific lessons of the Nazi genocide are passed down to future generations, the daunting reality that we are approaching a post-survival world is incredibly concerning and encourages innovative new methods that must be embraced to ensure history is not forgotten. In pursuit of this goal, acclaimed game developer Luc Bernard has created Light in the Darkness, a video game offering an educational, insightful, and historically accurate way for people to learn about and engage with the Holocaust. Even more recently, Luc has launched a virtual Holocaust museum, Voices of the Forgotten, inside the video game Fortnite, one of the most popular games in the world with approximately 400 million registered users and 25 million daily players. This received widespread acclaim and media attention from news agencies such as the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, Axios, and the New York Times. The virtual world is a place where anti-Semitism and other forms of virulent bigotry are unfortunately all too prevalent, and many video game players have had little past exposure to the Holocaust, which makes the mission of Light in the Darkness and Voices of the Forgotten all the more relevant. Today's program will go as follows. We will first welcome Luc Bernard, who will demonstrate his creations, Light in the Darkness and Voices of the Forgotten, and share stories and statistics that attest to its efficacy as a tool for addressing online anti-Semitism and promoting Holocaust education. We will then hear from Luc and a panel of experts about the problem of anti-Semitism in gaming, before next turning to Luc and a second panel of experts to discuss the problem's current issues in the field of Holocaust education. To conclude the program, there will be a question and answer session with the online audience. Now, I would like to introduce you all to Luc Bernard. Luc Bernard is an experienced video game designer, as well as the executive director and founder of Voices of the Forgotten, which is dedicated to improving Holocaust education. Luc is no stranger to stories of the Holocaust. Born in rural France and raised in the United Kingdom, he was told as a child stories about his grandmother who looked after Jewish refugee children who were rescued from Nazi Germany as part of the Kindertransport rescue operation just before the outbreak of World War II. As a teenager, Luc's interest manifested in the field to which he ultimately dedicated himself, video game design, as he noticed that while a great many video games were about World War II, they largely excluded the Holocaust and downplayed the evil of the Nazis. Following a surge of anti-Semitism he witnessed in the United States, Luc set out 2.5 years ago to create Light in the Darkness, which allows the player to see the experience of the Holocaust through the eyes of a French Jewish family who were a part of the 1942 Vel d'Hiv roundup and later deported to a Nazi death camp. Luc, thank you very much for being with us today.
Very much, yeah, I made the Light in Darkness, started working on it around 2.5, 3 years ago. It took us 2 years of research. It did to find out exactly everything that kind of happened in France. So, for example, like a lot of people don't know, in France was first Polish Jews who were targeted during the Green Ticket roundup. But I'll go into all those later. So long story short, made the game, released it for free. I did, and it had a 42% completion rate. And so most video games, it's 10 to 20% completion rate, meaning people actually finish the game. So we have more than double that. And since I launched it for free, we have had over 300,000 people who have finished it, and also with $0 of marketing. So it's been incredibly successful in terms of word of mouth, things like that. It's also done very well in countries like Saudi Arabia and Morocco. So that's why I translated it also to Arabic. And yeah, long story short, what's also been interesting is that a lot of people thought, no one would ever want to play is not the right word, experience a video game about the Holocaust. That was kind of overwhelmingly, the thought, no one wants to try this, all those things. And we've kind of seen the opposite because again, with $0 of marketing going up to 300,000 people have finished it, that's kind of quite amazing. It is. So yes, the Light in Darkness been out. It's been incredibly successful. I'm not that great when I kind of speak alone, but it kind of it works. It does, because also I think another way, the way I approached it too was because I mostly talk about Holocaust education in the US. So in France, you know, it's done a different way. In Europe, I feel like, compared to America. And from what I saw in America, the focus, or even in entertainment, is so much on the Nazis and also how they did it. So basically, it's kind of educating people how all the steps, how they did it, right? And the focus is very much on the Nazis, not all schools, of course. You know, I'm just talking just in general. While with the game, I decided to place it more on the Jewish experience, but also even in terms of the characters, like intentionally, I didn't have like any Nazi or French governmental main characters. I didn't, to kind of not do what Hollywood does, where they place such a big focus on Nazis. They do, which make it seem like there was just a couple quote unquote bad guys, you know. While me, it was my society that kind of changed in those times, that kind of let it happen too. So also by focusing on the Jewish characters too, it gives, since it's around an hour long, it gives people the opportunity to actually grow attached to these characters. It does. And I think that's why at the end of the game, basically I'm spoiling it, everyone does get deported pretty much, because the Veldiv roundup, a large majority of people did not survive it. And I think emotionally it triggers something very different compared to what I've seen with other things, like they're actually crying at the end. Players actually talk about the Holocaust at the end, they do. They even talk about modern day racism, all those things, like they actually go into, and I think actually kind of makes them maybe a bit more empathetic. Because to me, just my personal opinion, I think the goal towards Holocaust education should be trying to make the world less hateful. It should. That's what I just think my goal is. So that's basically kind of what it's done. And I can even let me actually, oh yeah, someone asked what does it works mean? So basically, like I explained, you know, there's like over double people that normally finish video games, you know, it's over double that it is. And like I said, people actually have an emotional reaction at the end. They do. And I can see it all, because a lot of people stream the game, all those things. And it's also basically got like, you know, a lot of word of mouth, all those things. But, you know, of course, I'd love to run surveys, all those things, to kind of know things more in detail. So this is just from what I'm witnessing. And so I hope to run surveys on the thing in the future. But I guess what I could do is I could kind of show the game a bit. Let me see.
Yes, please share your screen, Luc, with us. It would be wonderful to see your presentation.
Yes. Well, it's not a presentation. I'm just going to kind of show. I'm going to show the game. Okay, so I'm just using a video, but so for the first kind of part of the game, it's pretty much just normal everyday life. It is. So that's why this scene here is pretty much at their shop. It is. So it's just you just kind of doing normal tasks like helping your father around, all those things. Terrible describing my own work. I am. So that's kind of how the game is kind of done. Like it starts before, you know, a long time before the Nazi kind of invasion, not a long time, like a year or two before, you know, kind of up to the Veldiv roundup, because attitudes in France did also change too. So you can see this is pretty much, you know, the early on in the game. But if I kind of go to later, let's see which part my here. So I'm trying to find it. So also, like, say for example, like one part's also mixed in like historical footage and photos and all those things too. So say for example, when Germany actually invades France, I'd actually show the footage. So that's also been something that's been quite effective and kind of quote unquote educational at the same time, because pretty much we show documents, we show all those other things we do. So this is like, say for example, I have the date here. We're showing like, you know, the Nazi invasion, you know, of Paris. You know, all the historical footage which had to license. that's what's kind of neat, where it does have this kind of educational thing in between scenes like this, for example, without it feeling forced, which I think has worked quite well. It has. So yeah, so that shows this. I'm just going to kind of, I'm actually going to go a bit above, so I can show actually the green ticket roundup scene. I can. Yes. Okay. So this is the green book, because people have often asked, also often like, what do you do in the game? This and that, and I'm kind of like, it depends on the scene. It does. It's done like a movie, and depending on what happens in the story, you know, you have different things to do. Like it's not gamified for the sake of being gamified. So this is during the Green Ticket Roundup. So the Green Ticket Roundup was pretty much when France was first rounding up Polish Jews. They were pretty much. So they gave them kind of first piece of paper that's in the scene before, where it's like you have to show up at these police stations. But then when you basically showed up at the police stations, they gave you a list of all the things to kind of get, you know, as your spouse or your friends, because they were deporting, you know, all the Polish Jewish men to PTV camp. And so here you'll basically get to see, pretty much the real piece of paper, which we turned into a 3D model. And that's kind of what I mean, where it's like exactly how things were, if that makes sense, you know? So it's going to show here. Hopefully the video didn't go too fast with the piece of paper. Yeah, there it is. So this is, say, for example, the real piece of paper, which they actually used. They did. So that's on, yeah, that thing there. Pretty much so you have to go back, you know, and get all the things you do. You know, kind of like how it was in real life. So I'm wondering if doing this thing in this video, because I don't know if it's in this video, but in the game which is live now, so when Moses does arrive at the PTVA camp, I do show a photo how exactly how it was too. Let's see if the photo is actually in it. Funny enough, the PTV camp, we also had to design it. It doesn't exist anymore. So we had to like try and find maps to kind of design the buildings, location exactly how they were. Yes, it does. So say, for example, it's another thing where we kind of, and that has worked kind of well, actually, just showing the photos kind of in between, you know, each scene. So it shows like, hey, even if it has a cartoony look, this is like real and what happened, pretty much. So that's that. That's basically Light in the Darkness. I'm all for talking by myself, but what I can do too while we're at it quickly, before we move on to the panels, I can show the museum. I can. So the museum, which was created, was in Fortnite. You just have to launch Fortnite now. So Fortnite, for those who don't know what Fortnite is, might as well talk while it's loading. It's a very popular battle royale game. There's like around 200 million active players a month. It's one of the most played games in the world, but it's also kind of a metaverse at the same time too. So meaning there's not just one mode in it. There isn't. So since Light in Darkness, I used the Unreal Engine and I launched it on Epic's game store. Epic are the creator of Fortnite. I was basically able, or was in a Fortnite itself, to kind of make a Holocaust museum, kind of, you know, as a test. The Digital Holocaust Museum, it's just why it was made within Fortnite. It's just to kind of give equal access, possibly, to everyone in the US that doesn't have access to Holocaust museums. Because around 80%, this is from the Claims Conference survey, around 80% of Americans haven't been to Holocaust museums. So I didn't see it as something where it's like, bad Americans, how dare you don't go. It's more like they just don't have access to one. They don't. Because I grew up in a rural area of France where I didn't. Wait, this is not the right thing. Oops, I'm going into a different mode. Sorry, guys. So I lost my train of thought there. But basically, I grew up in an area of France with no access to Holocaust museums, no access to survivors, pretty much. That's why I did see. Come on. Yes, please work. I did see basically, I think Holocaust education should be accessible to everyone, kind of no matter where they are. And that's why I love Holocaust museums, but I do think need to kind of bring more of these things to where people are, kind of meet them where they already are. And so that's why I kind of made this museum. It didn't really, I'm not coming in and saying, hey, I'm replacing Holocaust museums. I'm just like, hey, I'm just trying to give access to 80% of Americans. That's all. So for this museum, pretty much within Fortnite, which Epic Games, they were very nice to me. Like, you're not really allowed to build a Holocaust museum or have photos or those things in kind of their game. But since they really, believe in kind of, what's happening in the world right now, they thought it was important. So it's very, I kind of just put in things which I wanted to talk about. So it's not, don't compare to Yad Vashem. It's definitely not Yad Vashem. It isn't. So I decided to talk about crystal art here. I decided to just do some exhibits about Sephardic Jews during the Holocaust, because that's something which often really isn't talked about. It isn't. Here, over in this room, I just decided to just tell lots of different stories. I did pretty much. So here, for example, story of Eva Kosheva. I know her family who are in Israel now, well, descendants of her brother. She pretty much was a Polish Jew who immigrated to the US. She founded the first lesbian bar in New York. Long story short, America was like, we don't like that, kicked her out. She ended up back in Poland. She went over to France. But then her and her girlfriend basically got deported to Auschwitz. But she's like kind of a very important, to me, an important figure, because she did found the first lesbian bar in New York. So I also talked about the Black Panther Tank Battalion, because they did help liberate a camp. They did. So talking about all these kind of different smaller stories, which not everyone has necessarily heard of. So just kind of things which I wanted to focus on, like Vichy Tunisia, like kind of, under, the Vichy government, which was France, pretty much what the Jews went through there. And then I did a whole room with entertainers during the Holocaust, which is a story of just different entertainers, which died, they did, but kind of tamed their story rather than just their deaths, who they were, what they did, all those things. So the concept kind of this museum was just very different, where I'm not focused, I don't focus on the Nazis. I don't focus on how the camps kill people. I don't focus on how the genocide was done. Instead, I'm doing something very different, which is, let me talk about the victims, but tell their story, but also talk about the people that helped too, and tell their story. Because even the story of Abdul Hussein Sadari, who was an Iranian diplomat who, long story short, he saved a lot of Jewish people. He got in trouble after. But I think his story was important, knowing that the Iranian regime, now denies it. But, back then, Iranian diplomats were actually helping save people. And, the story of Marianne Cohen, she saved like hundreds of children. She did. She died, Jewish French resistance fighter. So that was kind of the concept for the museum, just doing something different and something which is just to give access to everyone to kind of learn these things. And there's some schools that want to use it, same with the Light and Darkness, and like I tell everyone, I told those schools, I'm like, listen, it's free. All this stuff is free. The museum is free. Light and Darkness is free. You don't need to ask me. You don't need to pay me. You don't need to do anything. You can just use it. That's my goal. Why it's free? Because again, it's just because it's also easier. Well, that's what I've been told. Easier. For teachers who don't have access to museums to just be like, hey kids, you want to go in Fortnite? It's a lot easier to tell them that, or to have them, play a video game, just to get their kind of attention. So yeah, that's pretty much both projects.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, Luc, for that. It was wonderful to see your work on the big screen. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for showing us the museum also in Fortnite. So at this time, we will be turning to our first panel, which will discuss the prevalence and persistence of anti-Semitism in online gaming spaces. And I'm happy to introduce these next two experts that will be joining us. So we'll be having Mariana Rosenblatt, who is a policy advisor on technology and law at the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights. This past May, she released a report on extremism in gaming spaces, gaming the system, how extremists exploit gaming sites, and what can be done to counter them, that received widespread coverage and acclaim. And we also have Ruth Cohen-Dar, who is the director for combating anti-Semitism and Holocaust remembrance at the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She holds a BA and MA in political science from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Ruth has worked at the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 1986 and was posted abroad on 3 occasions, most recently as deputy ambassador to Poland. Since 2020, she has served as the director of the Department for Combating Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Remembrance, as well as the co-chair of Israel's delegation to the IRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. So thank you both for being here, and we're happy to begin this panel. Let me see. Okay, great. Just a moment as we technically arrange. Perfect. Okay. So I would just like to open the floor in case before the questions, if either of you would like to say anything or provide the audience anything in addition to what I mentioned about your experience.
Yep, thank you.
Great. Okay. So we'll start with the first question. How can we best go about advocating for action to reduce the prevalence of extremism in gaming communities without contributing to a moral panic that blames video games in general for acts of violence?
So who should start, me or Mariana? Mariana, you can go ahead. I looked at your research and I think it's going to be interesting for the audience. So please do.
Thank you, Ruth. So I think very important is clarity. So when writing or talking about the issue of the prevalence of extremism and hate-based harassment in gaming, we need to be precise about what we're talking about, what we're saying. We're not saying that simply playing video games makes someone more likely to commit violence. This was the narrative of decades ago. And many studies have been done and not shown that that's a causal relationship. So what we are saying is that based on evidence, extremist groups are able to exploit gaming sites and specifically the communications functions of certain games to advance their ideological agendas. And they're able to do so more effectively when companies are hands-off or negligent when it comes to moderation. So Luc's amazing games and experiences at the museum, they're possible because in that case, Epic Games, the publisher of Fortnite, decided, yes, we're going to allow this game to be published. This is wonderful. It takes layers of moderation and content guidelines and human review to make sure that the user-generated content, so not just the content of games that are published by these big companies, but the user-generated communications and experiences like the Holocaust Museum are accurate, that they conform to certain standards. And so video games, like any technology, can be used for good and for bad. It's a neutral technology. And there are definitely ways, like Luc has shown us, to use it for good. But that requires creativity and effort and courage from the part of developers and also companies. So that's what I would say. In order to make sure that we don't fall into a simplistic narrative, we need to be realistic and data-driven when we're talking about this issue.
But it was also interesting what you mentioned, because I can bring up something. So on this museum, pretty much Epic jumped on board to help me. So basically, say, for example, it is impossible for anyone to kind of do bad things inside the museum. So we disabled emotes. Emotes are things where you can dance and do all those things. We disabled emotes and voice chat. Epic helped do that because they kind of knew, what could go wrong, pretty much. So that was a fascinating thing, because when I was kind of getting attacked by Nazis, neo-Nazis, when announced the museum, a lot of them were like, we're going to storm the museum and can't create chaos. And they tried, but they couldn't do a thing. So they all gave up super quick. The worst that they could do is just walk in front of exhibits while another player. So they just gave up right away, they did. So that's why I thought it was interesting sometimes, at times, you know, the kind of a more mainstream press not understanding how we're able to modify things and change things to make it super safe. And I know some people, you know, because everyone assumed the worst would happen. Nothing has happened. We're kind of even more safer than even not safer, but people are less able to create chaos than even what they do at the Auschwitz Memorial. When you see people go and take selfies and do those dumb things, right? The Auschwitz Memorial, people aren't even able to do that within this Fortnite museum. So that's what's kind of great with video games. We can control how things work and how things interact and all those things. And Epic Games is actually really committed towards doing these things. It's just, again, at times, sometimes people might not understand, you know, how video games work because they're not exactly like a social media platform. They are. That's come Call of Duty's recent thing, which I can't pronounce her name. I don't know why for some reason. Mariana, could you know explain what happened recently in Call of Duty with the really cool AI thing?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I just want to underscore what you said about the role of designers and developers in having the foresight to know, okay, these things can go wrong, and we're going to design against it. We're going to make sure we disable certain features or encourage certain behaviors in other ways. This is what we call safety by design in the industry. So before things go wrong, to think about, okay, what is possible to happen because of what we know about the medium, what we know that there are always bad actors lurking, trying to exploit those, especially something as influential and popular as video games. I mean, keep in mind, the video game industry last year made almost $200 billion. That's significantly more than the music and film industries combined. And
I think you have
mentioned.
I think you have mentioned 3.2 billion players in that sphere. So that's quite a lot of people. If you count that
enormous
there are
reach. It has enormous reach.
almost half of the population on Earth. That's
I mean,
how I see it.
That's also.
If I can jump in, please, can I say a few things? First of all, I met Luc a few weeks ago, and I found it really amazing what you're doing. Really, it's great. But I want to go back just a few steps that I think that are a point of view of a person, first of all, who deals a lot with Holocaust remembrance and Holocaust denial and distortion, and as well as with combating anti-Semitism. So I see that on all spheres. And on purpose, I started to take a look at gaming because of the outreach, because of those 3.2 billion people, because it's a sphere that is not regulated. It's a business where people are selling games in order to make money. That's quite fine, but it sometimes creates those negative opportunities, if I can call them. And I want to say 4 things, actually. Please remember that we are almost 80 years since the Holocaust has ended. This means that quite a few generations already grew up without even a memory, without even knowing personally somebody who went through the Holocaust. All survivors today were younger kids at the ages of 10 and younger. So what they tell us is the view of the one story of a child and not really the story of the Holocaust. It's important, it's amazing, and it has an immense value to listen to those stories. And I will relate to that in a minute. But we have to remember that remembering the Holocaust is not just to remember, it's just to say, okay, I remember it happened, but it's actually and mainly to understand what happened, to internalize it and learn from it in order, so the slogan "Never Again" will not be just words that we say every ceremony when we remember those who perished. So, and it's important. It's a human tragedy that has implications in so many levels, not just for Jews. Yes, we were on the receiving end of this tragedy, but this affected humanity. 30-something million people lost their lives during World War II just because someone thought they have to exterminate 6 million Jews, or they were planning to exterminate all Jews. So I think the really important thing is to remember that, and to remember that using oral history, using the stories or the testimonies of the people who survived, and the concept of the museum is exactly that, looking at the story of the one person, which is amazing. Because it makes it accessible. It's easier to relate to a story of the one person than to talk about, extermination camps and the system and the usage of the gas and the planning, and really high-level engineers planned this whole killing machine. And it's really hard to perceive even to people who are experts in that matter. And I know that institutions like Yad Vashem or the US HMM and other institutions that are dealing with memory of the Holocaust are using testimonies, and they have developed expertise to cross-reference, to understand the historical story, the historical picture through the specific story, and to make sure that we create a reliable, and this is really important, a reliable and a true to the historical facts picture when we create one. We need to look at the hard facts when we tell the story. Like you are telling the story of, I think, two righteous among the nations, two people who saved people during the Holocaust. We have to tell the story of the righteous in the context that they were the minority, they were the extraordinary people. That was not the regular conduct of people during the Holocaust. During the roundup at the Val d'Hiv that you're telling, there were people who were standing aside and looking how the Nazis and others were collecting the Jews and sending them for extermination. So it's really hard to show all those dimensions of the story. And we have to remember that when we come to create a game or we come to create a Holocaust museum, which both, I think, really, I commend you immensely, Luc. Both are really important because they are accessible to an audience that otherwise will not have anything to do with the talking or listening or learning about the Holocaust. So this is really important. And let me give you an example that goes back to the conversation about what's going on social media. We started a project that is called My Story is Your Story. And it started because of, actually, we started talking about it because of a challenge that was on TikTok. I don't know if you remember, I think it was a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, that young girls dressed themselves like inmates in Auschwitz and said, photographed themselves, videoed themselves doing things as inmates. And this for me was heartbreaking because I know they're probably not anti-Semites or Holocaust deniers, but simply ignorant or stupid young girls. Sorry, I'm being so judgmental. And looking at TikTok and what's going on in TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, which has become really a fertile ground for toxic and hateful content, anti-Semitic and others, in the name of freedom of speech. So we need to remember that we need also to create positive content. And what you're doing, Luc, is exactly that. And our project goes to connecting young people who have no knowledge of the Holocaust. We collected 20 young people from all over the world. Most of them are not Jews. And we paired them with a Holocaust survivor. And each pair had a journey of a year when the Holocaust, it wasn't a one-time meeting. When the Holocaust survivor's job is to tell their story before, during, and after the Holocaust, and the young person's job was to take these pieces of life story and create a mosaic on social media language. And we have a really, really amazing products, if I can call them, from this first year. We are now, we have started the second year in March, the second cohort, and we are now in the first quarter. And between the meetings with the Holocaust survivors, we give them workshops. We have an expert from Yad Vashem, Dr. Rob Rosette, who is with us since the first cohort, and he's there to help us go sift through the historical truth. Because if a child remembers that they were taken from one point to another, we need to make sure that it goes together with the big picture of what the Holocaust story of that area was. So when we tell it on social media, we tell it in the right context. So he helps us with that. We teach them how to do storytelling on social media and give them tools to use social media. And I think the biggest challenge that I see today is there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of information. It's somewhere there in what we call the towers of academia and expertise. And our biggest challenge is to take this important and really important knowledge and bring it and make it accessible to the general public. May it be young people or older people, it doesn't matter. But our job, our responsibility is to bring that to them. And I have to say just 2 words. I know I'm taking time. We need to have experts on education in that circle, because they have the expertise how to communicate this tough subject to younger or older people, to different audiences. And the most important thing is to remember that social media is also a world without regulation. So nobody's regulating the rules. You have managed to close the game in order so people will not bombard it or abuse it for doing bad things. But in other spheres, it's very hard to do that. And that's why you see so much toxic content moving around. And I think trashing the environment where we all want to be, that has so much good to give us as a human society. Thank you very much.
So Ruth, oh yes, Luke, go ahead.
Oh yeah, because I was just going to respond there to Ruth's point. Yeah, because even as you explained pretty much, when the video found out what's happening, people were actually there just looking at it, just having it happen. And that's one scene like which we have basically in the game, where so it's all exactly how it happened. But what's been interesting too is because I decided to focus, on characters, and it kind of, people get attached to them throughout this 1 hour. They do, but what I noticed just really worked. So at first, I did have plans to put in Holocaust survivor testimonies, but I decided to go against it in the end. I did. And even, say, for example, in terms of the story, originally some characters were meant to kind of live, but then I decided against it because I was like, it won't be realistic if that's the case. So what I've really noticed, why I think it quite works, again, just my opinion, is so at the ending when kind of the young son, pretty much he's the last one to be deported, because that's also what they did too, first deporting the mothers from PTV camp, and after it was children. I pretty much showed the lives they would have lived if the Holocaust didn't happen. So that kind of way, so you always have him being deported, right, which he dies. Then you have the lives which they could have lived. And then at the end, during the credits, I showed the photos of the children that died, pretty much, and everyone just breaks down. And what players have been telling me is it all kind of expected, the characters to survive. They expected a happy ending, all those things. And that's why I really went against it, because I didn't want people to come out of the game and be like, oh, just having the thought that most people survived, when it's like, no, most people died. So that's kind of, I have a very different way of approaching things. So even my thing is, Shura Foundation does a fantastic job when it comes to survivors. You have all these organizations that do such fantastic jobs. So I had no interest pretty much coming in and kind of doing what other organizations are already doing a great job at. That's kind of called, my nonprofit, it's called Voices of the Forgotten, because I want to tell the stories of those who died pretty much and humanize them. Enough of pretty much these people just being like numbers, or just say, for example, you enter somewhere and it's like, when you hear their story, it's like, they died in a camp. This is exactly how they died. I'm like, who were they? Who were they? And I think that's why Light and Darkness resonates so well with people. And also, kind of to the point, so many gamers, right? Why I think it did well in Saudi Arabia is because Saudi Arabia is a huge gamer population. It is. And so it really just appealed to them. Most Saudis who have played the game, I've actually received the kind of messages from them where they've never known anything about Jews. They don't know anything about the Holocaust. They don't. And because it was approached in a way where it's like, hey, here's a video game. It's free. Play it, rather than say, maybe in an aggressive way, which is done at times, right? They received it a lot better. And I think that's why, but kind of to your point, Ruth, pretty much. And I think video games, I think we should have been in this earlier, because we kind of nearly in a way let social media, like I think Outreach Museum does a fantastic job, and thank God they're on Twitter. But I think we should have all been there on social media a lot before all these things. And that's turned into a disaster. That's why video games, we have to be in video games. We're basically the shapers of culture in the world. We're kind of more influential and bigger than any other thing. And that's why I got targeted by Nick Fuentes, because these neo-Nazis, they come from video games. They're that generation. So that's why it's kind of, they have a certain fear of, pretty much me coming in, but not trying to please people, just be like, here's a story, play it. And that's why I think it works, because it's a story. It is.
Wonderful. Great. Well, this has been a great back and forth. I appreciate that. Thank you, Luc, for responding and adding more onto your work and in the gaming world. I just want to turn to Mariana quickly with a question. So Mariana, in your report, you call on gaming and gaming adjacent platforms to introduce and more effectively enforce anti-extremism platforms. Basically the question, could you speak more about how you believe AI-powered enforcement could work, and in some cases how it is already operating, based on the different standards that you cite the potential for AI-powered moderation tools, and name one that currently exists, the good game well played?
Sure, and this goes to the question that Luc asked me that I didn't answer before. So what's really important to understand about many games, multiplayer online games, for people who don't play them or are not familiar, is that they're games where it's all about the content and your guide, there's not much user communication happening, but a lot of games have these communication functions where the gameplay happens side by side with players talking to one another. Often it's strangers over the internet talking with one another. And that's where a lot of the toxicity and harassment and circulation of extremist ideologies, including anti-Semitism, that's where a lot of it gets channeled. It doesn't mean, we did a survey at NYU where we found that 51% of gamers in 5 countries had come across an extremist statement or narrative while playing these types of games in the last year. And that's a conservative estimate. We used a very high bar for what we considered extremist. But we also know that it's actually a small portion of players who channel those sentiments. It's just that they're very influential. Because of this scale, the sheer volume of communication, and the fact that it's in real time, there's text chat, but there's also real-time voice chat in games. It's very hard to moderate. It's legitimately hard. Some companies don't try very hard, but some companies do try, and it's difficult to do it well. You have to consider the context of what was said, and in real time act before there is harm, like extremist recruitment, for example. So in order to scale moderation in these platforms, where communication again is ephemeral and spoken, and disappears, and is constantly happening, you need automated tools. So to answer your question, there are technical ways to deploy these tools. They rely on pre-trained databases of extremist material that organizations and companies have collected. They're cross-industry collaborations, and they use these databases to then train what are called classifiers to automate moderation. So when the AI comes across a piece of extremist content that's in this database, and it's a gigantic database, they're able to act upon it really quickly. In addition to those classifiers, there are tools like Good Game Well Played for text chat moderation, where the tool streamlines or triages the type of content that's surfacing and escalates it to a human specialist, a trust and safety specialist, to then decide what to do about that, how to enforce the platform's policies. So the AI is helping the humans better deal with the volume of communication and extremist communication specifically. And then there are newer tools that game companies are now adopting for voice chat, real-time voice chat, which is really exciting because so far it's been difficult to crack down on extremism and hostile action via voice chat, which is the most common way it gets channeled. But now startup Modulate has a tool called TalksMod, where they're able to actually act in real time to enforce the policies, as players are communicating those extremist narratives. And to go back to what Luc mentioned earlier, Activision, one of the largest game companies, recently, I think last week, announced that they're integrating TalksMod, this voice moderation tool, into Call of Duty, which is notorious for toxic content. That's a major, I think, movement in the positive direction from this company that it has traditionally been slow or not reluctant, let's say, to prioritize safety and well-being. So good news.
Yeah. I would even say the gaming industry is moving in the positive direction. It's just what I've been trying to explain to people for a while. It's like these companies need help because, like, say some things like holo hoax, right? Not the average gaming company doesn't know what that means. They don't necessarily know it's like a, kind of Holocaust denial word or those things. That's why I do believe instead of, kind of what Activision is doing, being proactive about things, but also, trying to bring more games, kind of what I do, pretty much to the space also.
Great. So we're nearing the end of this panel, and I have one more question. And it's free to whoever would like to answer it. But Ruth, you mentioned something earlier that made me think of this question. So if you feel inclined to answer first, please. So online extremism on video gaming platforms, well coordinated, is largely a grassroots effort undertaken by the most fervent adherents. So how can institutional efforts to redress this extremism and promote proper Holocaust education to the audiences that are most accessible to hatred?
I can try. If I had all the answers to these hard questions, I think I would be somewhere else. And we would all be somewhere else in a much better place. I want to say one thing regarding something Mariana said, that there are not many who are spreading toxic content, but you don't need to have many. You have one Nick Fuentes who can do so much harm as one person because of his ability to round around him all these nasty people. And you have a person like Kenya West, who calls his name Ye. He has 46 million followers on his social media accounts. So it's, I think, 3 times than there are Jews in the world, something like that. So you don't need many people in order to create and harm and do damage on a very big scale on the digital sphere, may it be social media or gaming. You need the one person or the 2 people who have enough tools and the will to do it. And since it's not a very regulated sphere, it enables it. So this is something that we need to remember. And here comes the role of governments. We have to have a discussion because governments and societies are 10 steps behind technology. We're already way diving into AI world, and the virtual reality world is here already, and things are happening that are 10, 20, maybe 100 steps ahead of what either governments or societies are thinking. And we need to have this discussion. We need to think how we preserve the freedoms and the advantages of these spheres, gaming, social media, and the digital sphere, while making sure that we at least limit as much as possible the possibility to do harm, because it's impossible to have an hermetic system. We know how the human mind works. our responsibility is to do our best to prevent and to give tools to the average user to confront this challenge. So one, to have a little bit of regulation that is not just up to the tech companies, either gaming or the platforms, because their interest is making money, and that's fine. That's why they are there. And the second is critical education. So teaching from a very young age to all the way to a very old, everybody in the middle, to look at what you see with a critical eye and understand that sometimes if somebody says something loud or strong enough, it doesn't mean it's necessarily the truth. And you need to look behind what they're saying in order to be on the safe ground and not help promote and proliferate negative and toxic content.
I was also going to add to Ruth's point. Yeah, because it's also sync too in terms of trying to fight anti-Semitism, all those things. I don't think we're reaching enough people pretty much. So that's why I think digital is important. Like, so when I do have a lot of people that come to me and they're kind of like, wow, the museum is great. My kid learned more than he did in school. Or there's things like people tell me like, you know, wow, it's crazy how many numbers you got, all those things. And I don't view that as a proud thing. I'm more like, we should be reaching more numbers. That's why I push these things in digital space. I'm coming in to push everyone pretty much into the digital space, because say, for example, a Holocaust museum shouldn't have less than 100,000 visitors a year, should have way more. We should be expanding things more and more. And so that's also one of the main reasons why I came in here, self-funded it, just pushing things out nonstop. It's not to be like, look, what I'm doing is great. It's to be like, it's possible. We need to jump into a space, and we should have been doing this years ago. So that's kind of what my big goal with this thing. And it does kind of work, because again, with $0 of marketing, I've managed to reach more people than, say, most Holocaust museums in a year. And this is not to diss those museums. I think they're great, but I think they need to start adapting to digital. Because like I've been telling some museums that I talk to, I'm like, guys, you shouldn't be just servicing the city. You should be servicing the entire state. And that's why digital can help basically do these things. And that's why we really need to be in this space pretty much. But also, again, stories and containing it the right way, it works. It does. But also do feel it's an interesting thing where I feel like at times there's a panic around video games, or maybe we say video games are a bit. So that's the thing, absolutely extremists do use it. That's no doubt about it. But say, for example, like in the case of some video game publishers, they might not want to put in a Holocaust denial policy, not because they want people to start denying the Holocaust, but because it can create even more problems where people then start trying to mess with it and be like, okay, let's try and do Holocaust denial. Or then another thing which can happen is like Jews control everything. Look, they managed to force this company to do this. Then other people might start coming in and being like, what about us? It becomes a huge, big headache for them. And it also could increase hate. So that's why I do kind of like what Call of Duty is doing. I do kind of like, you know, understand where Epic is also coming from, pretty much where Epic are also like, hey, we're just going to be proactive and allow you to build all these things and push them out. You know, so there's multiple ways of kind of doing things. If we just come in and just only policing things, right? We're not educating people, making people more empathetic. We just think game companies don't do this or don't do that, but people always find a way around. That's the problem. It is. That's coming. I think it should be kind of to your guys' point, pretty much moderation, all those things, plus with more content. So kind of both just complement each other.
Fantastic. Well, with that, we're going to close this first panel of ours today. So thank you all so much for joining. Mariana and Ruth, thank you so much for your expertise and your participation. Thank you for joining this panel as well with your awesome insight and giving more information about the game as we progress into the different panels. So for our second panel today, I'm excited to welcome two more experts to address current issues in the field of Holocaust education. So let's first say hello to Adi Rabinowitz Bedin, who is a Holocaust educator, lecturer, and VIP tour guide at Yad Vashem. Adi has a BA in Education and Political Science, as well as a master's in Democracy Studies. She is dedicated to Holocaust education and has crafted her own innovative approach to it, activist Holocaust education, which personalizes the lessons of the Holocaust so that they connect with the audience and to their daily life. Adi is also the founder and director of the Network for Innovative Holocaust Education, a vibrant growing community with 100 members from 21 countries who are all activists in Holocaust education. The network is dedicated to individuals who have a passion for Holocaust education and are actively seeking innovative tools, connections, and collaborations. Joining Adi in this discussion is Dave Rekis, Executive Director of 3GNY, Descendants of Holocaust Survivors. Dave is the grandson of Holocaust survivors from Poland and Russia. Trained as an elementary school teacher, he has an extensive background in education, management, and nonprofit leadership. Dave holds a BA in religion from Amherst College and a master's in childhood education from SUNY Cortland. Thank you both so much for joining today. As I said, for the first panel, if there's anything you'd like to open with or say first before we get to the questions, please, the floor is yours.
Go ahead, Adi.
Well, shalom, everyone. Thank you so much. Actually, I know already Dave and Luc because they joined the initiative of the network. And everything that has to do with the creation of the Network for Innovative Holocaust Education is exactly the things that Ruth and Mariana and you, Catherine, and of course Luc are addressing too. So I'll be happy to, during the panel, during your questions to say something about it.
Okay.
And I'll just add, I'm really honored and appreciative to be here and to hear from Luc and Ruth and Mariana and talk with you, Adi. Luc, the focus that you bring to stories as a way of connecting with a wide audience and creating empathy for the victims and survivors of the Holocaust is really admirable and something that we at 3GNY really focus on a lot as well, of engaging 3Gs, the third generation descendants of survivors, to tell our family stories, similarly to create that individual pathway so that people have one person to focus on in this much larger narrative, and as a way to create a connection that helps them find relevance in this larger story.
Perfect. So I'll open with the first question. Whoever feels most inclined to respond, please do so. So Luc has spoken about the importance of voices of the forgotten and light in the darkness as a way for those unable to access a physical Holocaust museum or participate in formal Holocaust education to be introduced to the truths and horrors of the Holocaust. So to the question, what steps, if any, should Jewish organizations and Holocaust museums take in seeking to supplement this virtual introduction to the Holocaust?
Dave, do you want to start this time?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think what is really valuable, or one of the things that's really valuable about this digital platform and reaching people through a gaming platform, as Luc said, it increases access to people who might not otherwise have it. And I think it was Luc who said that, one of your goals is to give people an interest, give people that first step in to learning about the Holocaust and learning the history of Jewish life before the Holocaust, as well as what happened during and afterwards. And so I think one of the real opportunities here is that by engaging people and meeting them where they are through gaming platforms, it can create that opening in the door. I don't think that Luc has any illusion that, as he said, for the Fortnite Museum, it is not the same as Yad Vashem and the exhibit at Yad Vashem. It is not trying to be the full picture of the Holocaust. That's what we say often when we work with schools. Our storytellers, our speakers, are not trying to be the comprehensive Holocaust education that we believe every student should receive, but one piece of it. And so if we as Holocaust educational organizations, other Jewish institutions, museums, can leverage the opportunity provided by a game like this to then say, okay, we now have millions or billions of people who are interested in learning more, who now have that emotional connection to Jewish population, to the Holocaust history. Now we can go and reach them through some of the digital tools that Luc and Ruth mentioned, to fill in the rest of the story and give them those pathways where they can go and find out the full history as they are interested in.
I agree. It was mentioned a few times already, the idea that it's all about access and making everything more accessible and relevant. I'm going to add the word relevant. That's the name of the story. So if we're talking about museums today and Jewish organizations, there are a lot of digital tools already today and digital archives and great access to many educators and scholars. They do it in a professional way, in a great way. However, I do see the need in making even that accessible. Not everybody is an educator or a scholar. We want everyone to get this information right. So we need to figure out where everyone is. And where everyone is today is in their phone, right? So we need to address the social media with all the challenges that were spoken about and the virtual world. And it's not just enough to have the website with the knowledge. We need to make it accessible. So if we're thinking about, students and young generations and even adults today, that's where we need to be. And making it accessible, I'll give you one example. In my previous speaking tour, I was in New York, and on Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, I was in Times Square, and they brought there a replica of a cattle car. And inside that, there was a digital presentation. And anyone, and that's the center, you can say it's the center of the world, right? If we're asking where everyone is, it's not just their phone. So for instance, we're talking about Times Square, everyone goes through there. So anyone can just go in and they got access to this information in a very creative way. That's what we need. We need creativity. So I want to also share when we're talking here about making everything more accessible and the digital, the world of the digital, I'm talking as an Israeli, right? So you spoke about the state and how 80% don't even have access to Holocaust museums. I come from a place with so much information about the Holocaust. There's not 1 week without a newspaper that says something about the Holocaust, some discovery or an article. Every student, every child, every soldier, everyone comes to Yad Vashem. My problem is that every time I would go to an event that has to do with the Holocaust, let's just say lowering the average age by a lot, okay? The average age is very, very, most of the people who are participating are not young. And I see a connection to this. This is why I initiated the Network for Innovative Holocaust Education. I want to come to the day, at least in Israel, a place where, it's in our discourse, it's a part of our state of mind, right? To be descendants of Holocaust survivor. I'm also a third generation of Holocaust survivors. But I want to see the day where I'll come to these events and see young people, and that will happen when people, educators, will understand that everything needs to be more accessible, more relevant. Relevant, it's also with the digital world, but not just. It's also, how do I connect? It's more about the message, right? So how do I connect between the message to the personal life? So you can talk about adding philosophy to that and a lot of educational knowledge that can help. It can help those who want to create digital content of Holocaust education. It can help them make it relevant and take it to the next step. So more accessible.
Yeah, Adi, I completely agree. And I want to add to that a little bit that, Catherine, your question was about what we as Jewish organizations and institutions can do, but it extends beyond that, obviously. Right? It's not only on us as the Jewish community to continue Holocaust education and make sure that it's an important part of every American, every citizen, everyone around the world of their what they are exposed to as they are growing up and as adults. And I believe it was Ruth who talked earlier about the role of governments and of all of us to push our governments to make sure that this is an important and essential part of everyone's education. There's been a lot of movement in the last several years across the United States to institute statewide Holocaust education mandates, requiring that the Holocaust be taught in every school. A little more than half the states, I believe, have some form of a mandate. It differs state by state, but that means that close to half do not, and therefore it's entirely up to each school or each school district whether or not they teach the Holocaust at all. At the same time, there are states that have a requirement, like New York State, where I live, just completed a survey this past year to see if it's actually being done. And what they found is that nearly 100% of school districts across the state are actually teaching about the Holocaust. The difference is how much and how they are teaching it. And that's where we have the opportunity to provide resources, digital, analog, in-person, Zoom-based, to reach schools that might not have that access that they do elsewhere, to bring speakers, programs, video games into rural communities that often do not have access to a Jewish community at all. And then in other states, such as Florida, which also has a Holocaust education mandate, my colleague in the 3G Miami group was telling me that even though it's required, when she speaks to teachers and administrators about bringing a guest speaker in to share their family story, because what we know is happening in Florida politics and community now, people are so afraid of teaching anything even remotely controversial in schools that the teachers are afraid to say yes to invite a guest speaker into their class. And so they have to go up the chain and make sure they got all the necessary permissions and make sure that no one's going to get upset and it's not going to lead to a school board meeting that is calling people out. And it's horrible. And so we have a role to help change that narrative and to help our governments, state and local governments, enforce the Holocaust mandates that we teach every student, and that we then back that up with the resources to make it effective, to make it relatable and relevant, as Adi said, and something that students are going to be engaged in and be that spark that then pursues them going down a longer road of investigating how did this happen? How did so many millions of people allow this to happen or contribute to it happening? What does that mean for us now and how we engage in our democracy today? And so that, I think, is what all of our responsibilities lies in.
Great. I think you both provided some really good answers to that, and expanded it beyond the scope of the actual question. So I want to ask, since we're focusing on the next 20 minutes that we still have together, I'd like to ask, as we approach a time when there will no longer be any survivors left to share their firsthand accounts of the Holocaust, what role should their narratives play in the future of Holocaust education, specifically regarding virtual Holocaust education resources?
So I'll start. First of all, I think the answer for this question would be relevant to any platform, digital or not. I think we always need, just like Ruth also talked about it, the historical context, but together with the personal stories. That's what's going to connect people to the message. We want to restore their faces, right? We don't just want to give numbers. We don't just want to spill out some historical facts. We want to connect people to the stories, and there's nothing like testimonies for that. So we do need to use true stories. You know, there's also, I know people write books also that are fiction. I don't like that so much because there are enough real stories and we need to use them. And that is being done. I mean, a lot of most of the resources, most of the lesson plans, digital, not digital, are now based on these testimonies. And I think that when we think about how this generation is disappearing, we're a bit scared, right? What's going to happen? How are we going to keep the memory alive? And I'm not so sure we need to be scared of that phase. It just means that the responsibility transfers, right, from generation to generation. That's the Jewish story, memory. It's so strong in our identity. You know, the reason I'm a bit optimistic is that if you think about it, for thousands of years until today, we tell the story of the Exodus. And if we're talking about the Holocaust, that's that's a history with documentations and a video and tons of information, and of course live testimonies, a videoed as well. So as a third generation, I see this also as my responsibility as a historian, and that's something that we can tell as well. And Dave's organization is doing it in an amazing way. There's also a 2G, I know sometimes organizations that do that as well. It's just somebody else has now the responsibility. We can still use it and we can still do it. Also, we need to be creative. We need to be creative. So it's not just, okay, showing a testimony. We can really be creative. It's, when we're talking about the dangers of AI, right, of the digital world, we shouldn't be afraid so much about it. It's just like you can use it for a good thing, for a bad thing, you can use it for a good thing, right? I always think, so I always bring associations from the Jewish world. So I'm thinking about Moses, the stick, right? He could hit the stone, but he could also cross the Red Sea with it. You can do something good, you can do something bad. We have an obligation to not abandon that field, to all these people, extremists and hatred. And by the way, the digital world is not just a challenge for Holocaust education, it's for anything that has to do with education. I also come from the field of social ostracism, and that's a challenge too. And it's always about finding people always talk about how the solutions to that would be technological, okay, also to social ostracism, also to the dangers of the digital world in any field. So we need to be creative and we need to use it in a good way. And we can do amazing things with AI, maybe bring back to life the testimonies, the stories, the life of the survivor, the things that we can learn from the life of the victims and survivors. So let's use that technology to be more creative. And that's something that we certainly have to use, and it's through these personal stories that we can use. And I think it's amazing that we have people like Luc. We should not be afraid of these challenges, and from complicated messages, we need to be out there because we want to help our children know the truth. The biggest, Ruth said something about the biggest challenge today. She said it's about translating, right, the messages from the academia, from the academy, to everyone, right? I look at it a bit differently. I see the greatest challenge today to know the difference between the lie and the truth. Okay, so there's so many lies out there. There's so many anti-Semitic resources there. Let us not abandon this field and help our children know the truth so that Holocaust education will always be relevant, and keeping the memory alive will not just be a nice title for any Holocaust lecture.
That was beautiful, Adia. There's not too much to add to that. I completely agree. I want to really quickly, you mentioned the idea of the solution to social ostracism being digital and being through technology. And the example of this webinar here with you from Israel, me from New York, Luc, I don't even know where you're zooming in from. Could be anywhere in the world today. But the ability to use digital platforms to connect us, first of all, has been really, really powerful among the 3G network through 3GNY and other 3G groups across the country, and other Holocaust educators and people who are feeling sometimes the burden, but also the obligation and privilege of carrying on the Holocaust legacy because it comes from our family. And being able to support each other and connect each other through digital platforms like this is really tremendous in giving us the support we need to make sure that the testimony stays front and center. And I do believe that is really, really important to your question, Catherine, that we make sure that testimonies and that individual stories stay front and center. And that's what's so appealing about both of Luc's creations, is that they take the enormity, the staggering enormity that is almost impossible to fathom, and drill it down to something relatable and individual that any one of us can find an access point to. And so as the survivor generation is getting smaller and smaller, through technology like Luc's Games, through technology like the Shoah Foundation Testimony Archive and the Dimensions in Testimony, where they recreated an interactive experience for participants to converse with survivors through pre-recorded questions, all the way down to a digital, but not quite as advanced, when we provide 3G guest speakers over Zoom to reach schools in places that would never have a guest speaker drive out to get there because it's too far away. And I've spoken to numerous teachers who are in far northern New York, or in Montana, or in the middle of Kansas, who recognize that they want to have this experience and give this experience to their students because their students have never knowingly met a Jewish person. And so when they're learning about the Holocaust, it's book reading. It's not real for them until they have an opportunity to engage one-on-one or in a small group with a survivor or a descendant of a survivor, somebody who can speak directly to the experience and can answer questions and help them see that Jewish people still exist in the United States, that we are still facing some similar anti-Semitic threats and comments, and that it's connected to a lot of the other movements that we see going on in the country. And when students can have that one-on-one, that personal engagement, even through digital, or especially through digital means, it opens up that access in really, really powerful ways that they wouldn't otherwise have. So we have to keep those front and center.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to invite Luc to join this panel quickly because I have a great question coming up. Welcome back, Luc.
Hi.
And this is open to the panel, but we'll start with Luc since I'll be directly addressing you. So what do you say to skeptics who say that as admirable as your efforts are and as successful as they are in spreading Holocaust awareness, their educational utility is limited and insufficient to properly educate someone about the mass genocide of 6 million Jews by the Nazis? What would you say about that?
So that's a really easy answer. I would ask them pretty much, then why is it survey after survey from the Acclaimed conference, from the UK, from all the places which have mandated Holocaust education, keep on telling us that Holocaust education is going down and anti-Semitism is going up? I would ask them, why is the data not available to what works? Very much. Why is it that we're constantly seeing it just get worse and worse? And so that's also the way I've approached things too, is because again, I get kind of everything from the Claims conference. I do, the 80%, this and that. And year after year, it's just like everything's, not everything, but everyone's like, everything's bad, it's getting worse and worse. And I'm just like, why don't we come up with new ways to try then? Because if, say, for example, you're running a survey and you're like, it's not working, but then you're doubling down on the things that don't work, that's kind of a bit of a problem. And also I bring up another thing, what I've noticed. I think we've placed such a burden on survivors and the descendants of survivors too, where kind of like in America, we've made everything around Holocaust survivor testimonies, bring them to schools, this and that. And that's nearly, how can I say, a bit, just my personal opinion, a bit wrong, where it's like you're basically placing all the burden of work onto these old people, right? You are pretty much, and not thinking kind of a new methods to be able to educate and kind of make people more empathetic. Because that's also another thing too. What is Holocaust education? Because I've seen some things, right? Some things which have been shown to me, but done by professional organizations, which I think are horrific. They're basically things which are kind of like showing us how the Nazis did everything, which is kind of like, are you just educating kids how to do a genocide now? Like, is that what Holocaust education is? Or is it trying to make people more empathetic? So my big thing also coming in here is like, let's kind of maybe rethink things, because it's not 100% working, because even the states that have mandated Holocaust education, it's going terrible. So, and I'm not coming in saying I have the solution. I'm just coming in and saying, this is what I've noticed works, and it's working. But I think we should just be trying all kinds of new things. And I think the big panic around, Holocaust survivors are really old now. They are, and there won't be many left. I would say we've put ourselves in that position in America, again, just relying on them for everything we have, when we haven't been thinking about ways. to educate. I think a lot of people really missed the point of Schindler's List. I think Spielberg changed everything when he launched that film, because it got a lot of people to care. It got survivors to be able to talk. But then we kind of went the opposite of Schindler's List, which was like, oh, we don't, again, talk about people's stories or humanize them. So that's the thing. Like, say, there's going to be less survivors around, right? And that's why we should start telling the stories of the 6 million too. We should, because it will still resonate with people just as much. So yeah, I'm just coming in and I just have questions where I'm like, what works, what doesn't work? Let's make everything available so then we can just know, and educators could know, because someone who's in a school in the middle of nowhere, they just don't know what works. So they're just going to take, okay, I'm just going to take this random thing, maybe this book, here you go, kid, this book. I don't know if my game. So that's what's weird too. The Light in Darkness, I think works 100%. The Fortnite Museum, I'm being very public about it. I don't know if it works. I don't very much. I know it can educate people, get them to know about certain aspects, but I don't think it makes them less hateful. I don't know. There's no way for me to track it. So that's why I'm being very open about it. And I consider the Fortnite Museum like kind of like a test. I'm kind of seeing what it does, all those things. And then again, just to make it publicly available. Maybe it does work, maybe it doesn't. I just have no clue. And I think it's needed like a healthier approach, just because we're approaching kind of the younger generation now who operate completely different. I mean, I know survivors who are on TikTok, and, you know, some people may think that's crazy, but I've noticed that it really works. It does. So yeah, just try new things. And I don't think any of us have 100% the answer, because it depends which country, which people, which this, like some things could work really well in Saudi Arabia, but could not work in France. That's what I'm saying. The more kind of what Adi does, you know, pretty much, I've got the name of the group. What's the name of the group, Adi, again? Holocaust what?
The Network for
Yes.
Innovative Holocaust Education.
Yeah, so what Adi does is great, because it's kind of this big thing where it's like, we're all together just trying to figure out, oh, maybe we could do this. Does this work? Does this not work? So that's why I do think we need to rethink things, because I even know this Holocaust educator who I look upon, like very highly upon, and she just believes the way it's being done in a certain state is probably turning people not the way we want them to turn. Because again, it has such a focus on the Nazis. It does. So it's a weird thing where I sound quite negative, but I'm just being honest. But I do think things can change. That's a weird thing. I do absolutely think things can change. I do think things can be positive, because again, with the game, I notice people are interested. They are. So I do this. It's weird where things are going terrible. They are in terms of all the surveys, all those things. But I do think there's a path forward, and I do think we can change things.
Okay. Dave, Adi, do you have anything to add? We have one more question, so just curious.
I do just want to add, Luc, I think that the idea of thinking outside the box and trying to find new methods of reaching people and new methods that are going to work, right? What works in Holocaust education is crucial. And that's why I really appreciate what you're doing. I do want to point out, though, in terms of the negative feelings about what's currently out there, one of the studies you may have seen from Echoes and Reflections showed how Holocaust education can really increase students' willingness to step in when they see something intolerant happening, being that upstander. And that has been really encouraging. In particular, that what they found is that students who had testimony as part of their education about the Holocaust were even more likely to intervene and to stand up for people who were being treated negatively because of that. And I think that speaks very much to what you were trying to do, of like when students have that opportunity to make that personal connection, it becomes less amorphous of just this general hate or general history, and it becomes more about the way that we treat each other as individuals and as groups of people based on our identity, which is the goal of decreasing hate against Jews and others as well.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely great, but then pretty much that again speaks to the problem which I've been saying, which is most people don't have access to museums, most people don't have access to survivors. So it can be like, great, I'm just going to use the Acclaimed conferencing. 20% of people have access to that, but then it's missed out on 80% of Americans. And that's why it's too late now, but I'd been trying to push museums at one point where I was like, go on Twitch. Twitch has a live streaming thing, because I did try out once with a Twitch. There's a Holocaust survivor and a comedian, and went incredibly well. But instead, I've seen a lot of negativity from organizations that came to me in the UK that, how dare you do this? And when it's like, well, it's reaching more people. Stop doing these things, but stop doing like Holocaust survivor testimonies behind Zoom. Put it out on Twitch, or do like what the TikTok survivors do. So my thing is very much in the things that do work, like what you just mentioned there, it's not reaching enough people. And that's one big thing. Like, we need to also think about two things. What works? So that's a case where it does work very much. And then just making it more widely available and not being scared to enter all these new spaces, because Twitch, there's more people who watch Twitch than the Super Bowl as ever. It's like, it's still in my mind honestly insane that we're not having like weekly Holocaust survivor talks on Twitch, pretty much for access to all the schools. So imagine you're like in the middle of Delaware or somewhere like that, and you're like, okay, at this hour's we're hot, and then thousands, because there's no limit. Millions of people can be watching that stream. So yeah, that's why I pretty much just reach more, just think outside the box. Museums, I love you guys, but use Twitch, all those things. Like, it's all readily available. Like, it shouldn't have taken independent survivors on TikTok to kind of reach more people, if that makes sense. You know, it should have been something which an organization that has a lot of survivors should be like, we're going to go on TikTok, we're going to make a whole TikTok series. So again, I'm just trying to push everyone into the space. My goal, like I told people, I'm after that 80%, and I'm going to go after and take that 80% with or without organization. Again, I'm working with organizations now, but why I'm doing that thing is to push everyone into it. It's not to be like, it's all mine, but to just push everyone into it.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
I wanted to say something about the question. That it's the first thing that came up to my mind is that when we talk about Holocaust education, we always talk about how we want somebody to hold our hand and walk us through this difficult information. And when it's just out there on the internet, you don't have that. So obviously, as an educator, as a tour guide in Yad Vashem, who believes that there's nothing like taking a tour guide and then walking them in the new museum by yourself, you can gain so much more with somebody walking with you. But Luc also mentioned the problem that even if we do have educators, they don't always do it right. So we have that challenge anywhere, even when you have that educator. I mean, they used to teach about the Holocaust with, those pictures of piles of bodies and talking about the millions, which means nothing to no one really. You want to restore their faces. And also, Luc mentioned something that I very much believe in, and that's my agenda and the activist Holocaust education approach that I have. And that is even if we are, we do have the right approach, we do have the right methods, okay? We do restore faces and things like that. What is the message? Is the message to teach you about the perpetrators? Is that the focus? Do we teach kids about the bad guys, how it became? Because a lot of educators like to do that, and I don't relate to that. You need to focus on the life of survivors and the resilience and the empathy. Also, Dave said something about it, altruism. So it's very much about the message. So even if you do have educators, it's not always done in a right way. So we have challenges everywhere, but we still need to be out there. And I think one of the things I'm learning when I'm combining my work in Holocaust education and social ostracism, it's that the discovery is this: in any act of violence, the solution is when the silent majority is working together and speaking out. So this is it. We have a lot of violence in this world. We have Holocaust denial, and we have anti-Semitism, and the majority is silent. And Luc has access to that majority. It's amazing. And next time they're going to be in a discussion saying something about Jewish people, saying something about the Holocaust. they might just have something to say about it. And that's how you break the act of violence, with giving a voice to the silent majority. So I applaud Luc for your work.
I love what you just said.
So since we're over time, I just want to ask if, for example, the next question that I have is more directly towards Luc. And then we do want to take some questions from the audience, but from the panelists that are here, I just want to check in. Are you able to stay? Luc, are you able to stay before we continue? Is everything okay? All right, cool. So last question for this panel, again, also directly addressing Luc, but part of the conversation. So Luc, as much acclaim as your efforts have received, there has also been some pushback. What would you say if someone from the Jewish community or a Jewish institution told you that making a video game about the Holocaust is disrespectful to the victims and the survivors, specifically trivializing such a traumatic historic event?
So we haven't received any things like that. We haven't. But if I was to receive that, I'd be like, have you actually played it? Do you know the story? And I would even argue with them. I'd be like, we've done it better in Hollywood. We have. Because in Hollywood, again, happy ending most of the time. People survive, all those things. I showed it realistically. I did. So it's no different than the animated film. It isn't. So that's why critics, if there was any, you know, it would be, that's a weird thing. I haven't, no one's kind of, I was expecting more controversy, but it's just, there's been none. There hasn't. They just, yeah, there has been a big organization, ADL, who pretty much did, you know, publicly in the New York Times were like, we don't say this can replace real Holocaust education, all those things. And I'm kind of like, yeah, no, I'm not coming in with the Fortnite Museum and saying this is better than Yad Vashem. But what I did do with Light in the Darkness, pretty much, and don't want to create fights between organizations, but you guys did a deal with L'Oreal for 100,000 students. We reached that in 2 weeks. So yes, I do think pretty much being in the space, you know, it's getting young people to kind of at least know about it and feel empathetic towards it. And yes, it does work. It does. So that's one thing where I'd love pretty much come out with your own stats, people against it, pretty much show me why. Say, for example, I was meant to do a debate in January with a Holocaust scholar who was very much against all my work. He even claimed pretty much that we spent 2 hours on a website. Well, I was like, Light and Darkness, we took 2 years. Not the case. But then he pulled out. He doesn't want to debate me anymore. He doesn't. So that's what, and again, I'm not saying I'm the best, have all the solutions, all those things, but it's more like even people against are kind of noticing the impact it's having and kind of being like, maybe I'm not entirely right. But again, I'm also not coming in and trying to say this replaces Yad Vashem. I'm not. I'm just saying this is just a new way to even, because it, even for educators or people, it might be easier to, because it'd be like, if the kids already played that game, it'd be like, okay, now you guys want to listen at least, kind of thing, or even to get people inside museums. Because even when you look at Assassin's Creed, very popular video game franchise, in France, it's known that as soon as all the kids play Assassin's Creed, that suddenly they're interested in that period of history. They are. So to me, it's just a curiosity thing to have people's curiosity. And also, and some people don't have access to Holocaust education, whatever that may be, the Light in Darkness at least kind of allows them to kind of understand. It does. And that's one fascinating thing which I noticed with streamers too, is a lot of Western streamers, they will kind of, because you can see them live, and a lot of them will be like, what, 6 million? Huh? I didn't know that happened. And a lot of them will be like, I didn't realize it was that bad. So what I really noticed too is that even within the UK and places where Holocaust education is mandatory, why is it I have gamers who don't know? They know the Holocaust happened, but they don't know everything. So yeah, I guess that's what the response would kind of be. Play it first and criticize it in terms of what's wrong with the game, pretty much. Exactly. So again, I've asked the critics at times, I'll be like, show me exactly what's wrong. Show me what the dates are wrong, this and that. No one's come to me yet to kind of, because I like a bit of debate, but no one's come to it, sadly.
Amazing. Well, that's good to hear. Any other thoughts, Adi or Dave? Okay.
I want to say that I suddenly am thinking about it, how, I said that the previous question, how we want there to be someone to guide you through this information. And Luc's project is not just information on the website, something that you run into. He created a virtual experience. So in a way, it's as if Luc is there, that educator, walking us through the museum and the game. And so it's not exactly like we would usually think about the virtual world, because it's an experience that we get. So
Yeah,
a thought.
So I was also going to say, the way I approach things is more like, I don't treat the audience as they're kind of not that smart. Like, I think they're smart enough to realize like a lot of things, and I think it has worked. So there's different methods there. But I can notice with younger people, let's be honest, teenagers, or those kind of things, the moment you're like, don't do this, and they'll be like, I'm going to do the exact opposite. So I think that's maybe why it might be working, or I think it does work, but for more skeptics, it's because I'm not coming in and being like, it feels forced. It doesn't. So that's one big thing. You have to make people naturally curious and on themselves empathetic, rather than going up to them and being like, you need empathy, you're doing this wrong. So it's a different approach.
And what that does is it allows, like you said, teens, right? They're making sense of the world as their brains and their experiences are developing. They're trying to figure out how they navigate the world. And what you're allowing them to do is go through this experience, but guided, as Adi said, but then giving them the space and the time to create their own meaning from it, and how it then is relevant and relates to their life. And that's very powerful.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Again, it's been interesting because people, they have different reactions after the game. Some of them who are like fathers, they talk about, they're like, if they can imagine if it would have happened to their family. Some people, they just talk about racism in general, they do, which of course they include in anti-Semitism. But so it's had different reactions, but it's all positive. It's not like someone at the end is like, I hate this, now I'm going to be a Nazi. It's more, it kind of does, I think, changes them a bit and allows them to kind of view things more empathetically. And that's, of course, because we focused on a family. We didn't go with 6 million first, but we focused on individuals first. And it's just easier for people to comprehend.
Oh, okay. So with that, this panel has been concluded, but I'd like to bring some questions from the audience, that we have some good questions for Luc. So one of them being, what would you recommend for Holocaust educators to take into account when crafting their own programming that utilizes a game framework?
Well, so we're going to be testing it out in multiple countries like Switzerland. I would just say the Holocaust educator just has the kids, or not kids, teenagers, because kids are a bit young. I'm kind of against kids learning about it, but teenagers, where it's like, play the game, guys. First, you just make them play the game. So all the teens in class will be like, I get to play a video game, pretty much. And then after that video game, they can kind of delve into the traditional education methods, which might make them pay more attention. So that's the way I would see it. I wouldn't, because the game itself has all documents, it explains everything. You don't need to be explained to the people the game at the same time. It all works on its own. So that's kind of way I kind of see it, because it just will make it, because again, also I'm hearing from educators about non-Jewish children, not children, teenagers that go to museums, a lot of them get bored. And it's not their fault. It's not because they're bigoted in any way. It's just like, they're teenagers, they are. But it's a bit like pop culture, all those things. That's why the games at the Museum of Pop Culture, because when things are kind of past pop culture, it's easier just to get people interested in it. It is after. So that's how I would advise doing it.
Okay. Another question. So the conversation so far has mainly mainly considered how video games can offer a pathway to proper Holocaust education. Do you think that video games such as Light in the Darkness or other efforts can directly counter video game extremism and Holocaust distortion or denial?
Yeah, because you need kind of more video games about this. I think it's been a problem that World War II games haven't addressed this. And it's mostly because game developers have been scared, because they're scared that a big organization might come after them and be like, how dare you make a video game about the Holocaust? Because most people don't know what a video game is. Not most people, but, you know, older people. So I think that's been a problem. And that's why I hope the Light and Darkness allows a lot more video games to be funded about this topic, because I'm about France. I do have other video games planned about other areas, but there's 6 million stories to be told. There is. So that's the kind of thing we need as many as possible. And again, we're the biggest industry now. We're bigger. Forget music, forget movies. They're nothing. They aren't. We shape everything. So yes, Holocaust stories need to be told within video games. Like, period. There's kind of no other option. There isn't. So, but in terms of extremist ideologies, yeah, I do honestly think stories, because even if you look at like stories of people who used to be Nazis, right, neo-Nazis, and they made friends with, you know, other minority groups, and they kind of got out of it, right? They did. So that's why I think stories, empathy might maybe make some people start to rethink things, because if their whole environment is just anti-Semites pretty much, and the internet, Twitter, and it's just Jews do this and that, right? That's why I think there needs to be more things that is within their generation. A lot of people don't realize Nick Fuentes comes from video games. That's where he got his start and everything. And so that's why it is kind of perfect medium to be in, not just because of our size, because we eclipse everyone else, but also because these young extremists come from that. It's not video games that made them that. It's just extremists that happen to play the biggest entertainment thing in the world. So it's normal. It's going to be people inside that space. So yeah.
Great. So that's all the time we have for the questions. But I want to thank everyone who came today, for our experts and wonderful panelists for their contributions and insights. We are incredibly grateful for this. And of course, for Luc for joining us and showing us the game and giving us way more insight into the industry, as well as the game itself and everything that you're working on. We greatly appreciate the great work you're doing in your respective fields for countering online extremism and promoting Holocaust education. So now I get to say a little bit about myself. I'm personally grateful to have had the opportunity to moderate this webinar as a graduate of the Jewish Studies master's degree at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem's Rothberg International School, where during my time as a student, I submitted a proposal to an academic contest on the topic of video games and Holocaust memory. My contest-winning video game proposal was titled Mystery of Yedvabne, which focused on the case of Yedvabne's Jewish community, which was one of the most controversial mass killings of Jews that occurred during the Holocaust and took place prior to the official Nazi occupation of the town. Basically, this was an idea of how people can learn about this mystery, this disaster, from a first-person player interactive for the new generation, interviewing local non-Jewish townspeople in the town of Yedvabne today. So that was something that I was really excited about as a student a couple of years ago. So being here with you all and hearing Luc, who actually did the dream and made the video game a reality, was wonderful to see and to learn about. So finally, thank you so much to the audience for attending today's event and for your thoughtful questions. If you missed anything or would like to view it again, a full recording of this webinar will be available online on the Combat Antisemitism Movement's website, as well as social media channels. So thank you all so much, especially to our colleague Derek Tasson, who put this event together today and could not be with us. And we wish you all the best and the great rest of your day.